All right, so welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be taking a look at the Lvov-Warsaw School, a pretty cool philosophical movement that I've been meaning to learn more about. And I guess that's why we're here. We've got excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on the Lvov-Warsaw School, so that's going to be our guide today.
Yeah, I think the thing that really grabs me about the Lvov-Warsaw School is their just total commitment to logic, but not just in kind of like an abstract way. These thinkers, they were so interested in how logic could be used in the real world, how it could make our thinking better in all sorts of areas like science, ethics, even how we see reality itself.
So they really saw logic as like this fundamental tool, a tool for understanding everything, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like they were trying to create this framework for thought, starting from the ground up, and logic was their main building block.
Like a blueprint for how to think. And it all started with, who was it? Twardowski.
Yeah, Kazimierz Twardowski, back in the late 19th century. He studied under Franz Brentano, who was like this huge figure in philosophy, and he brought Brentano's ideas back to Lvov University. This idea that philosophy could be a science in its own right.
I read that Twardowski was a crazy popular teacher. Like his classes sometimes had over 2,000 students.
Oh, yeah, he was known for that. It's pretty amazing, right, to get that many people excited about logic. But he had this way of making even the most complex ideas come alive. And his focus on clarity and precision, it really resonated in Poland, especially after it gained independence in 1918. There was this whole energy of rebuilding, and the Lvov-Warsaw School saw logic as absolutely crucial for creating a strong, rational society.
So they weren't just thinking about logic for logic's sake. They saw it as this tool for building a better future. But what did that actually look like? What were they, doing with logic?
Yeah. Well, it went way beyond just like analyzing arguments. They saw logic as this powerful language that everyone could use, like a shared tool for understanding everything else. And they used it to break down concepts, to figure out what words really meant, even to build entire systems of knowledge.
And they weren't afraid to kind of push the boundaries of logic itself, right?
Yeah.
Like with that Polish notation thing. I've got to admit, that just blew my mind when I first learned about it. Writing logical formulas without any parentheses.
Oh, yeah. Polish notation is so cool, isn't it? It was developed by Jan Łukasiewicz, one of the stars of the Lvov-Warsaw School. And the beauty of it is in its simplicity, really. Instead of using parentheses, you put the logical operators, the ands, ors, and nots in front of the statements. It just makes everything so much clearer.
So Polish notation's not just about being elegant. It actually helps you see the structure of logical statements more easily. It makes working with them more efficient.
Right. And Łukasiewicz, he didn't stop there. He actually challenged the whole idea that statements have to be either true or false. He developed this thing called many-valued logic.
That's right. Many-valued logic. So how does that work? Does that mean like something can be a little bit true and a little bit false at the same time?
Well, it's not exactly that simple, but think about it. In classical logic, every statement has to be either true or false. But what about statements about the future? Or about things that are uncertain? So Łukasiewicz proposed systems with 3 or even more truth values. It opened up all sorts of new possibilities for understanding things like, well, future events, for one, or quantum mechanics, where things get really weird.
Wow. So he was basically expanding the vocabulary of logic to deal with a more complex reality. Now, I also read about Stanisław Lewnicki. Wasn't he building his own kind of unique logical systems too?
He was. Leszniewski was a fascinating guy. He was obsessed with creating these comprehensive logical frameworks. He actually developed 3 of them: protothetic, ontology, and Mariology. And each one was meant to create this complete system for understanding the world.
3 systems. Wow, he was ambitious. So could you tell me a bit more about maybe just one of those systems? Like what was his ontology all about?
Well, ontology for Leszniewski was all about the connection between names and the things those names represent. It was about how we categorize and talk about things in the world and how to make sure we're doing it in a logically rigorous way.
It sounds incredibly detailed and complex. What was that concept he had, constructive nominalism?
Ah, yeah. That was one of his big ideas. He believed that symbols, the actual physical symbols we use in logic, were themselves real objects. Like, think about it. Every time you write down a logical formula, you're creating a physical inscription. And for Leszniewski, only those inscriptions that have actually been created physically are the ones that truly exist.
So for him, logic wasn't just some abstract system. It was grounded in the actual physical reality of the symbols we use.
Exactly. which, when you think about it, fits perfectly with the Lvov-Warsaw School's emphasis on clarity and precision. But they also had a member who tackled the whole concept of truth head on. Alfred Tarski, have you heard of him?
Oh yeah, Tarski. He's a huge name in logic, isn't he?
He was a giant, and his work on truth was groundbreaking. You got to remember, at the time, a lot of philosophers were really skeptical about even talking about truth. They thought it was too subjective, too relative, but Tarski, he had a different approach. He built on Aristotle's ideas and came up with this rigorous way to define truth for specific languages.
Didn't he come up with something called the T schema? Like a way of saying this sentence is true if and only if, and then you fill in the blank with what the sentence means.
That's a great way to put it. That's basically what the T schema does. It connects the truth of a sentence to its meaning, to what it actually says about the world. And this approach helped him avoid all those tricky paradoxes, like the liar paradox. You know, the one where a sentence refers to itself and creates a contradiction.
Right, right. It's like saying this statement is false. If it's true, then it's false, and if it's false, then it's true. So Tarski was trying to find a way to talk about truth that was, well, logically sound and actually meant something. But the Lvov-Warsaw School's interests weren't limited to just logic, were they?
Oh, no, not at all. They were super interested in the philosophy of science, too. They saw logic as the key to understanding how science works and how all the different scientific disciplines fit together.
So for them, logic was a way to understand how we gain knowledge about the world and how science helps us do that.
Exactly. They were fascinated by things like the role of induction in science, how we go from specific observations to general laws, and the nature of causality, especially in quantum mechanics, and even the philosophy of time. They believed that logic could help us grasp the very structure of scientific theories, how evidence supports those theories, and how all these different areas of science relate to one another.
It's like they were pioneers in the philosophy of science, using logic to connect the world of ideas to the world of experiments and observations. But I also know that they developed some of their own, well, unique philosophical views, like Kotarbiski's Rishasm, right? The idea that only concrete things exist and no abstract things.
Yeah, resourcism, that was a big one, and a pretty radical view. Kotarbiski was basically saying that there are no abstract entities, like no properties or ideas that exist independently of concrete things.
Wait, so no abstract ideas at all. So how can we even talk about things like justice or beauty?
That's the challenge of reism. Kotarbiski didn't say that we can't use those words, but he insisted that we reinterpret them in a way that fits with his view. So, for instance, justice isn't some abstract ideal. It's a set of concrete practices and institutions, things that actually exist in the world.
So it's about grounding philosophy in the tangible, observable world. I get it. But that still seems, I don't know, super tricky. What about things like consciousness or free will? Are those just illusions created by the physical stuff in our brains?
Those are exactly the kind of questions that reism forces us to grapple with, and there are no easy answers. Kotarbiski himself argued for something called radical realism, which applied the principles of reism to the mind as well. He said there are no mental contents, no inner experiences, only the physical processes happening in our brains.
Whoa, okay, so no subjective experience. That's pretty wild.
It is, and that's why reism is still such a controversial idea. It demands a completely different way of thinking about the mind, a way that many philosophers just, well, they struggle with it.
Right, right. Okay, so reism is definitely something to think about. But what about another unique perspective from the Lvov-Warsaw School? Ajdukiewicz's radical conventionalism. I remember reading about that, and it really got me thinking about how much our own perspectives shape what we believe to be true.
Oh yeah, Ajdukiewicz's radical conventionalism, that's a really fascinating one. He argued that even our most basic observations, the things we think are just, seeing the world as it is, those are actually influenced by the conceptual framework we're using.
So it's like we're always looking at the world through a particular set of lenses, and those lenses color how we see everything.
Exactly. And those lenses, they're not neutral. They're shaped by all sorts of things, like the language we use, the theories we believe in, even our cultural assumptions.
So even when we think we're being objective, there's always a bit of subjectivity creeping in. Makes you wonder if it's even possible to see the world completely clearly without any bias.
That's the challenge that radical conventionalism brings up. Yukievich was saying that these conceptual frameworks, while they're necessary for us to make sense of the world, they also inevitably influence our understanding. We can't just step outside of them.
But if everyone's seeing the world through their own, subjective lens, doesn't that mean that, like, anything goes? But
Yeah.
there's no objective truth.
Well, that's a common concern and a valid one. But Adjukovitz didn't think that radical conventionalism led to like a complete free-for-all. He pointed out that our frameworks, while they're shaped by us, they're also limited by the world itself. Like we need to be able to make sense of our experiences and we need to be able to interact with our environment effectively. So there are some constraints on what kind of frameworks we can use.
So it's kind of like our frameworks are our own creations, but they also have to, in a way, reflect the objective reality of the world they live in.
Right. It's this interplay between the subjective and the objective. And this focus on how our perspectives shape what we know and how those perspectives themselves change over time, that was a really important theme for the whole Lvov-Warsaw school.
It's a pretty humbling thought, isn't it? It makes you realize that even your own strongly held beliefs, the things you're sure are true, might be influenced by things you're not even aware of.
It is. And I think that's why radical conventionalism is so valuable. It encourages us to be more, well, more humble about what we know and more open to other ways of seeing things.
It's like instead of arguing about who's right and who's wrong, we should try to understand where those different perspectives are coming from and what we can learn from each other.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the search for truth is a process, and there might be more than one valid way to understand the world. And that idea, that openness to different perspectives, I think that was at the heart of what made the Lvov-Warsaw School so influential. They were pushing the boundaries of logic, language, and knowledge, and their ideas are still relevant today. Picking up from where we left off, I think it's worth, really diving into realism a bit more. It really makes you rethink some of those ideas we take for granted in philosophy.
Yeah, it's so radical. To think that abstract concepts don't exist at all, it's hard to imagine how you could even approach things like, I don't know, ethics or politics, even math, without abstract ideas.
Exactly. It's a real challenge. But for Khodorkovsky, it was all about sticking to what's real, what's concrete. Like take justice, for instance. A realist wouldn't think of justice as some kind of, ethereal ideal. They'd look at how justice actually shows up in the world. Laws, courts, the way people treat each other, those are all real concrete things.
So instead of arguing about this big abstract idea of justice, we should be looking at the systems and structures that determine how justice actually works in the real world.
Exactly. It's about bringing philosophy down to earth, focusing on the tangible things, the way those things interact. That's where the real action is.
But wouldn't that run into trouble when you get to things that seem, well, inherently abstract, like mathematical truths? Is the Pythagorean theorem just, a description of how physical triangles behave? Or is there something, I don't know, more to it than that?
That's a great question. And it's one that reists have definitely thought about. They'd argue that even math, as abstract as it seems, ultimately comes down to relationships between concrete things. The Pythagorean theorem, it's not about some, otherworldly realm of forms. It's about a pattern that we see consistently in the physical world.
So math is like a language we've created to describe the patterns and relationships that exist in the concrete world. It helps us make sense of those patterns, but it's the patterns themselves that are really real.
Exactly. And this focus on the concrete, it has some pretty wild implications when you start thinking about the mind. Remember Khodorkovsky's radical realism? It takes this reism idea and applies it to, well, our inner world.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as mental content, just physical processes in the brain. I have to admit, that's one of the hardest things for me to wrap my head around. It just feels so obvious that we have, thoughts, feelings, experiences. How can all of that just be, physical stuff happening?
It is a tough one for sure. It goes against a lot of our intuitions about consciousness. But for Khodorkovsky, even our inner experiences are grounded in the physical world, in the incredibly complex workings of the brain, the neurons firing, the chemicals interacting, all of that.
So even though it feels like we have this separate mind, it's really just the brain doing its thing. There's no, like, soul or some kind of non-physical essence.
That's the idea behind radical realism. And it's definitely caused a lot of debate among philosophers. Many find it difficult to accept. But for Khodorkovsky and many of the Lvov-Warsaw school, sticking to what's concrete, what can be observed, that was the most important thing.
It's a really bold stance, no doubt about it. It makes you question some really basic assumptions.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got radiism, but what about that other fascinating idea that came out of the Lvov-Warsaw school? Ajdukovich's radical conventionalism. That one really made me think about how much our own frameworks, our own perspectives shape what we think is true.
Ah, yes, radical conventionalism. Arjdukovich's work is so interesting because it highlights the role that we play as humans in shaping how we understand the world. He said that even our most basic observations, the things we think we're just directly perceiving, they're actually filtered through our own conceptual lenses.
So we're always looking at the world through a certain set of filters, a certain set of biases, and we might not even be aware of those filters.
Right. And those filters, they come from all sorts of places. The language we speak, the theories we accept, the culture we grew up in. All of that shapes how we see and understand the world.
So even when we think we're being totally objective, there's always some element of subjectivity sneaking in. Makes you wonder if we can ever really know anything, for sure.
That's exactly the question that radical conventionalism raises. Ajdukovich was arguing that these frameworks, these lenses that we use, while they're necessary for us to make sense of anything, they also inevitably shape our understanding. There's no way to just, step outside of our own perspective.
But if everyone's looking at the world through their own subjective lens, doesn't that mean that truth is relative? That anything goes?
Well, that's a natural worry, for sure. But Ajdukovich didn't believe that radical conventionalism meant that there's no such thing as truth. He said that while our frameworks shape our understanding, they're also limited by, well, reality itself. We need to be able to make sense of our experiences, right?
Yeah.
We need to be able to function in the world. So there are some constraints on what kind of frameworks we can create.
So it's like our frameworks are our own creations, but they also have to, in a way, reflect the real world, the objective world that we live in.
Exactly. It's this constant back and forth between our subjective interpretations and the objective world that pushes back on those interpretations. We're always adjusting our frameworks, trying to find a way to make sense of things.
So it's not like we're just making stuff up willy-nilly. Our frameworks have to, in some way, connect with reality.
Right. And this emphasis on the dynamic nature of knowledge, the idea that our understanding is always evolving, that was a really important idea for the Lvov-Warsaw School. They were very aware of how much our perspectives shape what we know and how those perspectives themselves are always changing.
Pretty humbling when you think
Yeah.
about it. Even our most deeply held beliefs might be influenced by things that we're not even aware of.
It is, and I think that's one of the reasons why radical conventionalism is so important. It encourages us to be, well, less certain about our own beliefs and more willing to consider other points of view.
Instead of getting caught up in arguing about who's right, we should try to understand where those different perspectives are coming from, what they can teach us.
Exactly. It's about being open to the possibility that there might be more than one way to understand the world, even if those ways seem completely different. And that spirit of open inquiry, of intellectual curiosity, that's something that really defined the Lvov-Warsaw School. They were pushing the boundaries of what philosophy could be, and their work is still relevant today.
It's been amazing to delve into their ideas to see how they grappled with these really big questions, but I'm also curious about what they thought about how these ideas could be applied in the real world, especially in a world that was, well, pretty chaotic during their time. Did they think logic and careful analysis could actually help solve real-world problems?
They did. The Lvov-Warsaw School, they were very concerned with the social and political implications of their work. They really believed that using logic, thinking clearly, questioning assumptions, all of that could help us create a better society.
So they weren't just ivory tower philosophers detached from the real world.
Oh, no, not at all. They were really engaged with the issues of their time. In fact, several members of the school were involved in politics, in education reform, things like that. They saw their philosophical work as directly relevant to the challenges facing society.
That's really inspiring. It shows that they were serious about making a difference, not just coming up with interesting ideas.
Exactly. They were committed to the idea that philosophy, when done right, could be a powerful force for good in the world.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly illuminating. We've covered so much ground, reism, radical conventionalism, and it feels like we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
I agree. There's a whole world of ideas waiting to be discovered in their work. But I think we've laid a good foundation for understanding what made the Lvov-Warsaw School so important and why their ideas still matter today.
Absolutely. It's made me realize how much our own perspectives shape everything we think and do, and how important it is to be aware of those perspectives, to be open to other ways of seeing things. That's a lesson that's more relevant than ever, I think.
Well said. The legacy of the Lvov-Warsaw School, it's a reminder of the power of human reason, of the importance of being humble about what we know, and of the possibility of finding common ground, even when we disagree.
It's given me so much to think about, for sure. I'm really looking forward to continuing to explore their work and seeing how their ideas can help us make sense of the world today. But for now, I think we've covered a lot in this part of our deep dive, and it might be a good time to, give our listeners some food for thought as they continue their own exploration of the Lvov-Warsaw School. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. We've given them a taste of the Lvov-Warsaw School, but there's a whole banquet of ideas out there waiting to be discovered.
So we're back. I don't know about you, but after that deep dive into the Lvov-Warsaw School, my brain is, well, it's pretty full. They covered so much, and they really thought hard about these things we often just take for granted, like logic, language, and even like what truth actually means.
Yeah, their dedication to being clear and rigorous, even when they were dealing with these really complex and abstract ideas, it's impressive. It's like they wanted to create a philosophy that was, both intellectually deep and also connected to real life.
Right. It wasn't just about theorizing for them. They were thinking about how these ideas could help us understand things like science, ethics, politics, how we actually live in the world.
And they weren't afraid to challenge the usual ways of thinking either. Like, take Kotorbisky and his realism, right? The idea that only concrete things actually exist, that makes you really question some pretty fundamental assumptions.
Reism is definitely mind-bending. It's hard to wrap your head around the idea that, like, abstract ideas don't exist. Does that mean things like justice or beauty are just illusions?
Well, Kotorbisky wouldn't say they're illusions, but he would say that we need to understand them in terms of real things, real relationships, real actions. So justice, it's not this abstract ideal floating around out there. It's about laws, it's about institutions, it's about how people actually treat each other.
So it's about grounding these big ideas in the world we can actually see and touch. It's a pretty big shift in how you look at things. But what about, like, math? Are mathematical truths just, descriptions of how physical objects behave?
That's a good question. Reus would say that even math, which seems super abstract, comes down to relationships between real things. Like, take the Pythagorean theorem, right? It's not about some truth that exists in some other dimension. It's about a pattern that we see consistently in the physical world.
So for them, math is a language we use to describe those patterns, those relationships that we observe in the concrete world.
Yeah.
It helps us understand those patterns, but the patterns themselves, those are what's ultimately real.
Exactly. And this focus on what's concrete, it has some really big implications when you start thinking about the mind. Remember radical realism.
Yeah.
Kotorbisky took this idea of reism and applied it to, well, to our inner world.
Right. The idea that there are no mental contents, no inner experiences, just the physical processes of the brain.
Yeah.
I've got to be honest, that's one of the toughest parts of reism for me to grasp. It just feels so obvious that we have subjective experiences, thoughts, feelings. How can that just be reduced to, physical stuff happening in our brains?
It's a tricky concept, no doubt about it. For Kotorbisky, though, even our inner experiences are ultimately grounded in the physical world. The way our neurons fire, the way chemicals interact in our brains, all of that complex activity is what gives rise to what we call the mind.
So he's saying there's no immaterial soul, no essence that exists separately from our bodies.
Exactly. That's the essence of radical realism. It's definitely a view that a lot of philosophers struggle with. But for Kotorbisky and for a lot of the Lvov-Warsaw school thinkers, that commitment to grounding philosophy in what's concrete, what we can observe, that was paramount. It was about building a philosophy that was firmly rooted in the world as we experience it.
It's definitely a bold and thought-provoking idea, I'll give them that. It makes you rethink some pretty basic things about reality and our place in it. It's like they were trying to make philosophy just as rigorous and empirical as science.
That's a great way to put it. They saw logic as this essential tool for understanding the world, not just in some abstract way, but in all its messy, concrete details. And they believed that logic could help us solve real problems, create a better society, all of that.
It's amazing to think that this group of thinkers, working in a time that was so full of upheaval and uncertainty, could have such a lasting impact on philosophy. They really expanded what philosophy could be.
I agree. Their legacy is huge. They showed that philosophy can be rigorous, demanding, and still deeply connected to what it means to be human.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our Lvov-Warsaw School deep dive. I don't know about you, but I feel like I've learned a ton. I'm definitely going to be thinking about these ideas for a while.
Me too. It's been a fascinating journey exploring these ideas with you.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this intellectual adventure.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive and that it's made you curious to explore the world of ideas with the same kind of rigor and open-mindedness that the Lvov-Warsaw School exemplified. Remember, the journey of learning never truly ends, so keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. Until next time.